All right, so transgender issues, guns, two culture issues, but they take a pass, or at least they tell the president, no, we're not going to step in for you on the issue of immigration. What's the most consequential part of that?
Well, it means that for 700,000 people who wanted to continue the protections that were put in place by the Obama administration, they continue. The Supreme Court isn't taking up the Trump appeal at this point, litigation going on throughout the country, and right now it helps, as I said, hundreds of thousands of people go forward with what's known as DACA, the deferred, people who came here as children undocumented.
Which means the court could still, right, agree to take it up next term. But what we learned today is they are not stepping in this term on that issue, as far as we know, and that's a victory for Chief Justice John Roberts, I think, who wants to keep the court below the radar maybe a little bit and keep these issues maybe still in play.
He's got some mixed tensions here because, as we know, in November, right before Thanksgiving, he issued that statement to invoking President Trump. There are no such thing as Obama judges, Clinton judges, but unfortunately the court keeps showing its fault lines. Just as I said in the transgender, it did split Republican justices versus Democratic justices.
Anthony Kennedy really was last of the dinosaurs, right? I mean,
that's right.
He was someone who probably would have split on these issues, I assume, right?
And you know what? He cast likely the fifth vote on the gun rights case. Antonin Scalia, who wrote the landmark 2008 ruling allowing an individual right to handguns under the Second Amendment for the first time, probably had to navigate around Anthony Kennedy, who, as we all know, is not there.
No, not on the court. And so I want to come back to what this says about John Roberts. With Kennedy gone, the emergence, if you will, the further emergence of John Roberts as the Chief Justice. But the president, not that long ago, just last week I believe it was, thought that he was going to get his win. He thought the Supreme Court was going to step in, which would give him, we'll get to the nitty-gritty of the shutdown a bit later, but the president thought this was going to give him some leverage in the immigration fight when he said this.
I think it's going to be overturned in the United States Supreme Court, and I think it's going to be overwhelmingly overturned. I mean, nobody thinks that should have happened. We think it was a fluke, and it was a disgraceful situation that a judge ruled the way the judge ruled. If we win that case, and I say this for all to hear, we'll be easily able to make a deal on DACA and the wall as a combination. But until we win that case, they don't want to really talk about DACA.
Well, they would actually be happy to talk about DACA, and right now they think they have a lot more leverage over the president.
I mean, this is what I think is so fascinating about the Supreme Court's decision to essentially say they're not going to really resolve anything around this case. Is like, one, it currently upholds the DACA situation, which affects some 700,000 people who came into the country not legally as children. But secondly, it really removes this bargaining chip that the president had banked on having during the government shutdown. And you look at public polling, and time and again, the public seems to side with the idea of offering some sort of resolution to DACA or Dreamer kids, as they're known.
Right, and so we'll watch that play out in the shutdown. What does it tell us? Let's guns, transgender issues, so sexual preference issues, immigration, the court saying no, not now. What does it tell us about this court? Again, Anthony Kennedy is gone. The question has been, A, what would Brett Kavanaugh do? What would the second and third year of Neil Gorsuch bring us? But more importantly, John Roberts now, does he have more freedom as Chief Justice because the swing, it's a different ideological balance?
Well, to go to Jonathan's point about Anthony Kennedy, in some ways the chief himself could also say Anthony Kennedy is defying labels by going on both sides, and on so many social issues, culture war issues, he would go with the left. And now the chief himself is in the middle, but his vote is not fluid that way.
Right.
He is definitely not going to be with the court on religion and gay rights and sexual orientation type issues. So it gives him more power with his vote, but it means more. He's got more of the reputational interest to worry about. And what they didn't act on today, they didn't take up an important religion rights case involving a coach who wanted to pray on the 50-yard line in Washington State. They haven't acted on a very controversial Indiana abortion law. So they're dipping into some things, and just so everyone knows, we're right at only the halfway point of the court. Right. We now know the contours of their caseload, but we don't know what they're going to do.
But John Roberts,
and do they have a? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if John Roberts is the closest thing there is now to a swing justice. It just underscores how much the center of gravity on the court has moved to the right post-Kennedy.
Absolutely.
It also says one other thing, I think. You look at John Roberts, and they had been sitting on these petitions for a while, right? It takes 4 to grant cert. It takes one justice to move it off the conference list for down the line. So what did we see today? We see the court saying, we're not going to hear DACA now. We're not going to hear this abortion case this term. There was another LGBT rights employment law case. We're not going to hear that this term. But on the other hand, we see this newly solidified conservative majority on the Supreme Court assert itself today. We see the grant on that Second Amendment case, and we see the fact that the 4 liberals chose to say we would have kept that military ban off the books for now while it plays out in the lower court. And one other thing, they did not take up that religious liberty case. But the 4 conservatives, they wrote separately, and they said, right, we shouldn't have taken up this case about this coach who knelt on the yard lines during a football game. However, we are troubled by some of the language that was in that lower court opinion. They sent major signals today.
And the court has already moved so much further to the right on religion, even when Anthony Kennedy was there. So this is a very different conservative Supreme Court than we had, frankly, in the 90s and the early 2000s.